The phone sitting on my kitchen island refused to remain silent. 47 missed calls on Monday, 63 by Wednesday. By Friday morning, the number had officially hit 103. Every single vibration sent a small, quiet wave of satisfaction radiating through my chest as I sat in my newly renovated living room, a mug of dark roast coffee in my hand, watching my former employer's digital infrastructure crumble from the outside looking in. 5 days earlier, I had walked out of Summit Systems with nothing more than a cardboard box containing my personal belongings and a calm smile that utterly confused every single person who witnessed it. My direct manager, a man named Greg Harmon, had just cheerfully announced that the Senior Systems Architect promotion, the exact role I had been exhaustively working toward for 3 agonizingly long years, was going to someone else. And it was not just going to anyone, it was going to Bryce Paxton. Bryce was the undisputed office favorite, a young guy who could not debug his way out of a wet paper bag, but possessed an uncanny ability to charm his way into any executive boardroom. Upon hearing the announcement, I had congratulated Bryce with genuine warmth in my voice, shook his hand firmly, and offered a pleasant smile to Greg. Then I had walked directly to my workstation, quietly disabled the complex automated scripts I had written on my own time that kept our fragile servers running smoothly, documented absolutely nothing in my final status reports, and tendered my resignation effective immediately. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody understood what they had just lost. 6 months ago, Greg formally created the Senior Systems Architect position. He pulled me aside shortly after the announcement and told me that the role had my name written all over it. He asked me to prepare a comprehensive roadmap for the third quarter infrastructure upgrade, promising that we would make the promotion official once I delivered it. I spent the next 4 months designing a massive overhaul of our deployment pipeline, focusing on containerization, orchestration, and zero downtime deployments. I prototyped the entire new system on my own personal time, thoroughly documented every architectural decision, created extensive training materials for the engineering team, and presented a detailed implementation plan that would save Summit Systems approximately $300,000 annually in operational costs. Greg loved it. The Chief Technology Officer loved it. The presentation to the executive board went flawlessly. Greg shook my hand afterward, praising my strategic thinking and promising to finalize the paperwork with human resources by the end of the month. That was 6 weeks ago. This Tuesday morning, Greg unexpectedly called an all-hands team meeting for 9 o'clock. It was highly unusual. I grabbed my coffee and joined the 23 other members of the engineering department in our large central conference room. Greg stood at the front of the room, practically vibrating with forced enthusiasm. He announced that after careful consideration, he was thrilled to name Bryce Paxton as the new Senior Systems Architect. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. Bryce looked genuinely surprised, standing up to modest applause, shaking Greg's hand and delivering a brief, polished speech about how honored he was to collaborate with everyone. I clapped along with the rest of the room. I kept my expression entirely pleasant and neutral. Inside, however, a lifetime of frustration suddenly crystallized into absolute, razor-sharp clarity. After the meeting dispersed, Greg caught my elbow and ushered me into his private office, closing the door behind us. He avoided making direct eye contact as he explained that the decision did not reflect poorly on my technical abilities. He called me phenomenal at what I did. He claimed the senior role required someone who could interface smoothly with external stakeholders and represent the team in executive strategy sessions, arguing that Bryce possessed the soft skills that clients responded favorably toward. Soft skills. My 3 years of unpaid overtime, my comprehensive system documentation, my relentless mentoring of junior staff, and my complete cost-saving infrastructure redesign had been entirely defeated by soft skills. I told Greg that I completely understood, and I genuinely meant it. I understood the situation perfectly. Greg's face washed with profound relief. He told me that they desperately needed me right where I was, handling the complex execution and keeping everything running while Bryce focused on the high-level strategic vision. In corporate translation, This meant Bryce would proudly take credit for all my innovative ideas while I continued doing the actual grueling work, all at my current salary, in my current stagnant role, with zero prospect of future advancement. I smiled, told him it made perfect sense, shook his hand, and calmly walked back to my desk. For about 20 minutes, I simply sat at my workstation, staring blankly at my dual monitors without truly seeing them. My mind was extraordinarily calm. There was no hot anger, no deep sadness, and no crushing sense of betrayal. There was only cold, calculated logic. I pulled up my personal bank accounts. I had been saving aggressively for well over a decade, living far below my means since paying off my mortgage. Between my liquid savings and diverse investment portfolios, I easily had enough funds to cover roughly 14 months of living expenses, or more if I tightened my budget. I checked my professional email. Several technical recruiters had proactively contacted me within the past month alone. The market demand for an architect with my specific skill set was exceptionally strong. I made my final decision. Before taking any action, I pulled out my phone and called a good friend of mine who happened to practice intellectual property law. We spoke quietly for about 15 minutes. I needed to ensure I was standing on solid legal ground. We discussed Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, which governs copyright and exclusive rights. Because I had written these specific automation scripts on my own personal laptop, entirely outside of my contracted working hours, and because they were definitively outside the scope of my official job description, they remained my exclusive intellectual property. Summit Systems had absolutely no legal claim to them. Armed with this confirmation, I opened a fresh document and drafted a brutally simple resignation letter. It was professional, courteous, and effective immediately. I explicitly stated that I was forfeiting 2 weeks of salary to accommodate the complete lack of a traditional notice period. I cited my desire to pursue other opportunities and thanked the management team for the experience. Then, I systematically began to dismantle my invisible safety nets. The monitoring scripts were the first to go. I was incredibly careful not to delete a single file. Deletion could be construed as intentional sabotage and could potentially invite legal trouble. Instead, I simply disabled them. I modified the scheduled tasks so they would no longer execute. The underlying code remained perfectly intact within the company repository, but it would no longer actively run in the background. If anyone ever bothered to look at the server logs, they would simply see that the scheduled tasks had cleanly stopped. The automated recovery scripts received the exact same meticulous treatment. Disabled, entirely preserved, but dormant. I moved through every major system I had independently improved over the years, quietly and meticulously removing my digital fingerprints. The entire process took roughly 3 hours. Nobody interrupted me. Everyone naturally assumed I was just diligently performing my usual daily tasks. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the entire technical infrastructure of Summit Systems had been returned to the exact state it had been in 3 years ago. It was functional but incredibly fragile. It was capable of handling light traffic, but it existed completely without any safety margins. It would function perfectly fine under normal, quiet conditions, but the very moment anything unusual occurred, a sudden traffic spike, a minor database hiccup, a brief network glitch, there would be absolutely no automated safety systems there to catch it. The team would have to manually fix the resulting problems, assuming they could even figure out what the problems were in the first place. He stammered, demanding to know what was going on, and asking if this was about the promotion. He desperately offered to discuss a raise, a title bump, or perhaps a different lead architect position. I maintained an even, calm tone, thanking him for the offer, but stating clearly that my decision was absolutely final. I told him I would pack up my desk and be out of the building within the hour. Greg protested loudly, insisting that I could not simply leave without notice. He asked about the critical infrastructure and the massive deployment projects scheduled for the upcoming quarter. I replied coolly that the core infrastructure was fully documented in the company repositories and that any competent engineer could easily maintain it. I added, with just a hint of irony, that I was entirely confident Bryce would have excellent strategic ideas for moving the project forward. Greg's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He accused me of being unreasonable and demanded at least a standard 2 weeks of transition time. I reminded him that I was willingly forfeiting my salary for those 2 weeks, and that according to the precise terms of my employment contract, this was perfectly acceptable for an immediate resignation. I noted that I had already confirmed this directly with Human Resources earlier that morning. Greg's voice hardened as he called my actions incredibly unprofessional, especially after everything the company had supposedly done for me. That statement almost made me laugh out loud. Almost. I looked him dead in the eye and stated that I had given Summit Systems 6 years of exceptional, undercompensated work. I assured him I was leaving professionally and legally, and that my resignation was effective as of that very second. I turned on my heel and walked out of his office before he could utter another word. Packing my desk took less than 30 minutes. I did not have much. Just a few framed photos of my wife and kids, several heavy reference books on advanced systems architecture, a worn coffee mug my daughter had painted for me years ago, and a small, resilient, succulent plant that had somehow survived under the harsh fluorescent lights for 4 years. A few coworkers stopped by my cubicle, visibly shocked by my sudden departure. I told every single one of them the exact same rehearsed line. I had been presented with a phenomenal outside opportunity that I simply could not pass up, and I genuinely wished them all the absolute best. Bryce approached my desk just as I was taping my cardboard box shut. He looked profoundly uncomfortable. He insisted that he had not asked for the promotion and claimed he had no idea I was even being considered for it. I actually believed him. Bryce was not a malicious person. He was simply oblivious to his own immense privilege within the corporate hierarchy. I offered him a genuine congratulations on the new role and sincerely hoped it would go well for him. Bryce looked desperate, asking if there was any way he could convince me to stay, or at least grab coffee sometime the next couple of weeks to pick my brain about the infrastructure. He nervously mentioned that Greg had told him I had done a lot of custom back-end work. I smiled politely, hoisted my box, and told him I was sure he would figure it all out, reminding him that all the official code was right there in the main repository. I wished him good luck and walked away. I exited the front doors of the building at exactly 2:15 on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. Several people in the lobby looked utterly confused. A few looked deeply concerned. I glanced back and saw Greg watching me from his second-floor office window, his cell phone already pressed tightly to his ear. He was likely frantically calling the Human Resources Director, or perhaps Richard Blackwood, our Chief Technology Officer. The afternoon sun was brilliantly bright outside. The expansive parking lot was mostly empty, exactly as it always was in the middle of a typical workday. I carefully loaded my box into the trunk of my car, climbed into the driver's seat, and took a long, incredibly deep breath. The air inside my car felt lighter. I turned the ignition, pulled out of the lot, and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. The very first call came early Wednesday morning. It was Greg. I let it go straight to voicemail without a second thought. When I finally listened to the message, his voice was tight with forced friendliness. He suggested that we had gotten off on the wrong foot the previous day and begged me to call him back to talk things over. I calmly deleted the message. 3 more frantic calls from Greg came throughout the day on Wednesday. Susan Miller, the Human Resources Director, called twice. Richard Blackwood, the CTO, called once. Richard's call was highly unusual. In my 6 years at the company, Richard barely knew my name, despite the indisputable fact that I had kept his entire technical operation running smoothly and quietly. I did not return a single one of their calls. When I woke up on Friday morning, my phone screen was a wall of notifications. There were 47 missed interactions in total, spanning calls, voicemails, text messages, and even a frantic direct message on a professional networking site from Richard Blackwood. I leisurely brewed a pot of coffee, scrambled some eggs, and finally sat down at my kitchen island to listen to a select few of the voicemails. Richard's voicemail was far more direct and commanding. He stated his full name and title, insisting that we needed to speak urgently regarding catastrophic systems issues. He demanded a call back that very day. Susan's message was clipped and hyper-professional. She claimed that despite my immediate resignation, They urgently needed to schedule a formal exit interview and discuss critical knowledge transfer. Knowledge transfer. That is the polite corporate euphemism they use when management suddenly realizes that absolutely nobody else in the entire building knows how anything actually works. I deleted every single message and went for a long, peaceful run through my neighborhood. That single message told me absolutely everything I needed to know. Multiple enterprise clients were currently experiencing total service outages. The automated safety systems I had carefully built were no longer there to quietly catch the problems. The remaining engineering team had absolutely no idea how to manually fix the complex issues that my hidden scripts had been invisibly resolving for years. Greg was right about one thing. I did care about doing the right thing. That is precisely why I had spent countless unpaid hours building all those resilient systems in the first place. I did not do it for glory or promotions. I did it because regional hospitals and city services heavily depended on our platform being reliable. But I had also finally done the right thing for myself. I had given Summit Systems 6 solid years of unwavering loyalty and technical excellence. They had responded by passing me over for a substantially less qualified candidate simply because that candidate was better at playing golf and kissing up to management. The servers were not failing because I had maliciously sabotaged anything. They were failing because the underlying infrastructure had always been inherently fragile, and I had been the sole person constantly masking that severe fragility. Now the protective mask had been removed, and executive leadership was finally seeing the terrifying reality of their systems. Saturday morning was surprisingly quiet. There were no incoming calls before 9 o'clock, which strongly suggested that everyone on the engineering team had finally surrendered, gone home late Friday night, and collapsed from exhaustion. The various client outages had likely been resolved through grueling, purely manual intervention, but they had eventually been resolved. Around 10 o'clock, my phone finally rang. It was not Greg this time. It was Richard Blackwood. I decided to answer. There was a heavy pause on the line. Richard quietly noted that the system was in the same state it was in back when the company was suffering 4 major outages a month. He admitted that he wouldn't know about that history because it was before his time as CTO. Another pause followed, much longer this time. Finally, Richard spoke with a startling level of candor. He confessed that he simply had not known the true extent of what I was doing behind the scenes. He admitted that it was his own fundamental failure as a technology executive. He explained that Greg had repeatedly assured him the technical operations were firmly under control, and Richard had blindly trusted that assessment without ever looking closely at who was actually doing the heavy lifting. That admission was probably the closest I would ever get to a genuine apology from an executive leader at that company. I calmly informed Richard that I already had an interview scheduled for Monday morning for a principal architect role at another firm. Richard didn't miss a beat. He immediately countered, offering to formally create a brand new principal architect position just for me. He bumped the offer to a 40% salary increase and stated that I would be Bryce's direct superior, reporting directly to Richard himself instead of dealing with Greg. A 40% raise and reporting directly to the C-suite. A mere week ago, that offer would have been an absolute dream come true. I told Richard that I needed time to think about it. He stressed that he desperately needed a final answer by Monday morning. He reiterated that angry clients were actively threatening to leave, that the company desperately needed technical stability, and that I was apparently the only human being alive who knew how to provide it. Right there was the ultimate leverage. It was the explicit, verbal admission that I had not just been a good, reliable employee. I had been an absolutely essential cornerstone of their entire business. I promised him an answer by Monday and ended the call. Monday morning arrived. I put on my best tailored suit and drove across town to the sprawling campus of Pinnacle Innovations. The corporate office was sleek, modern, and flooded with natural light. The open floor plan somehow felt focused and collaborative rather than loud and chaotic. The engineers I passed in the wide hallways looked intensely engaged, but not perpetually burned out. My interview was conducted by the Vice President of Engineering, a sharp, insightful woman named Sarah Jenkins. and the current director of infrastructure, a highly technical guy named David Ramirez. They had clearly done their homework before I walked into the room. Sarah opened the conversation by mentioning that they had been trying to actively recruit someone of my caliber for over 6 months. She noted that my specific back-end work at Summit was well known within local industry circles, pointing out that their platform reliability metrics had improved dramatically during my exact tenure. I was genuinely surprised and admitted I did not think anyone outside of Summit tracked that data. David smiled and told me they had analyzed publicly available uptime reports. He recited the numbers, noting that I had taken their platform from a struggling availability rate to near perfection, calling it an exceptional engineering feat for a system of that immense complexity. Sarah laid out the offer. The role was Principal Systems Architect, exactly as advertised. The base salary was exceptionally high, significantly more than even the desperate counteroffer from Summit. It included a substantial annual bonus target, generous equity options, 4 full weeks of paid time off, and the flexibility to work completely remotely 2 days a week. They wanted me to start in exactly 2 weeks. The financial package alone was staggering, but the profound respect they showed me was worth infinitely more. I decided to be completely transparent. I told them I currently had a competing offer on the table from my former employer, who had asked me to return in a newly created senior leadership role. Sarah nodded calmly, noting that she was not surprised they were trying to win me back. She asked what was making me hesitate about returning to the devil I knew. I chose my words with extreme care. I explained that I was no longer confident the culture at Summit was an environment where I could thrive and grow over the long term. David nodded knowingly. He stated that corporate culture is everything, and proudly mentioned that Pinnacle's retention rate for senior engineering staff was extraordinarily high. He added that people tend to stay there because they feel genuinely valued, not just desperately needed during an active crisis. Valued, not just needed. The exact philosophy my father had instilled in me. I asked if I could have until the end of the business day to make my final decision. Sarah agreed instantly, telling me to take all the time I needed. I walked out of the building, sat in the driver's seat of my car in the Pinnacle parking lot, and immediately dialed Richard Blackwood's private number. He answered on the first ring, anxiously asking if I had made a decision. I told him I had. I thanked him for the generous offer but stated firmly that I was officially declining. The line went dead silent for several long seconds. Finally, Richard asked why, arguing that they were offering me absolutely everything I had originally asked for and everything I had rightfully earned. I told him the painful truth. I explained that he was only offering it now because he had a gun to his head, not because he actually wanted to recognize my worth. I told him there is a massive difference between the two. However, I did have one final request. I told Richard that my automation scripts were merely disabled, not permanently deleted. I explained that they were safely sitting in the main repository in a specific, hidden directory. I admitted the documentation was sparse, but noted that any truly competent systems engineer could easily figure them out, given enough time. I gave him my explicit verbal permission to use them, modify them, or do whatever the company needed to stabilize the platform. I heard a long, heavy exhale on the other end of the line. Richard called the gesture incredibly generous and thanked me profusely. I clarified that I did not build those critical tools for company recognition. I built them because the platform serves important, real-world clients who desperately need total reliability. I stated clearly that I did not want innocent hospitals or municipal city services to suffer terrible consequences simply because of Summit's toxic internal office politics. The official paperwork was fully signed and finalized by Wednesday afternoon. I had intentionally negotiated a start date 3 weeks out. I desperately wanted some actual, uninterrupted time off between demanding jobs to thoroughly decompress, clear my head, and reset my stress levels. The barrage of desperate phone calls from Summit Systems finally ceased entirely after I sent a brief, highly professional email directly to Richard, Greg, and Susan. The email formally confirmed that I would absolutely not be returning under any circumstances and explicitly documented exactly where they could find the automation files in the repository. My very first day at Pinnacle Innovations was everything my first day at Summit had not been. Sarah personally took the time to give me a comprehensive tour of the massive facility. David introduced me to the entire infrastructure department, a brilliant group of highly skilled engineers who seemed genuinely thrilled to have another seasoned senior architect to work alongside. My high-end workstation was already perfectly set up with the exact dual monitor equipment I had requested during negotiations. Sitting on my desk was a thick welcome packet containing detailed information about company benefits, cultural guidelines, and a handwritten welcome note from the Chief Executive Officer himself. They were relatively small gestures, but they were the kind of small things that clearly communicated immense value and respect. Today, I am the Vice President of Infrastructure at Pinnacle Innovations. Our company recently went public, and the massive equity package I had been granted was easily worth enough to completely pay for my children's college educations and purchase a beautiful vacation home in the mountains outright. But far more importantly, I now proudly lead a massive organization of over 80 brilliant engineers scattered across 4 different continents. We have collectively built one of the most robust, reliable software platforms in the entire global industry. We are regularly cited in prominent business publications as a prime example of engineering excellence. I am frequently invited to deliver keynote speeches at major conferences, to author technical articles, and to mentor young, rising technical leaders. I still think about those 103 frantic missed calls. I think about the sheer panic and desperation of all those people who had taken my silent, massive contributions for granted, suddenly waking up to realize exactly what they had lost. I never answered a single one of those desperate calls, and I have never regretted that firm decision for a single second. The fragile servers I had stopped maintaining eventually got fixed. But they were not fixed by me, but likely by expensive outside consultants and new engineers who were far less familiar with the intricate systems. The company ultimately survived the crisis, although their reputation was permanently diminished. The frustrated clients who depended on the platform either found alternative solutions or suffered through the agonizing instability. I kept it brief. I told them that 2 years ago, I was trapped in a job where I was absolutely essential but entirely invisible. I worked in a place where I delivered my absolute best work, only to watch other people take all the credit and steal all the opportunities. I admitted that I had been loyal to a massive fault, and that my blind loyalty was never once reciprocated. Walking away from that toxic environment was absolutely terrifying, but it taught me a crucial lesson that I wanted to share with all of them. I told my team that a person's inherent value does not magically change just because the people around them fail to recognize it. What actually changes is whether you choose to remain in a place that suppresses that value, or if you find a place that allows it to flourish. I looked at all the brilliant engineers I had personally hired, mentored, and fiercely supported. I told them that I was finally in a place where immense value is recognized, where incredibly hard work directly leads to massive growth, and where loyalty truly flows in both directions. I promised them that I was fully committed to ensuring that every single person in that department felt exactly the same way, because absolutely nobody should ever have to choose between their personal self-respect and their professional career. The entire room erupted into deafening applause. I had learned an incredible amount in the years since I had calmly walked out of the front doors of Summit Systems. I had learned that being totally irreplaceable in one specific place often just means you are permanently trapped there. Being truly valued means that leadership actually wants to help you grow far beyond your current role. I had learned that the absolute best form of revenge is not found in petty sabotage or angry public callouts. True revenge is simply building something excellent somewhere else, and never once looking back. And finally, I had learned that 103 desperate missed calls from people who had taken you completely for granted is, in fact, an incredibly satisfying number. I never called them back. I never needed to answer. I knew my worth, I protected my integrity, and I found a place where I was valued, not just needed.